Okay, so we are in the third webinar of the Department of Geography, co-sponsored by Queen Mary, University of London, where our speaker comes from. This will be put on YouTube maybe tomorrow or a day or two, and it will be available for a much bigger public who can't make it today. I understand that some of our Jessica and I have some colleagues from other parts of the world who wanted to come, but it's early morning for them right now where they are from. So this will become available to them. So let's get started with the talk. I'll introduce the speaker, and then we'll get started with the talk proper. So it's my honor to introduce to you my colleague and good friend, Jessica Jacobs, who is a geographer whose work focuses on identities, heritage, tourism to the Middle East. Her work focuses on how heritage is visualized, remembered, and enacted through the production of tourist space. Her research methods and outputs use filmmaking, handicrafts, and other arts-based activities to create maps. And these maps, along with other community-focused strategies, aim to engage a wider community within the scope of academic research and knowledge production. Her current projects include producing a community map in southern Jordan and using crafts and filmmaking to map gentrification in London. Dr. Jacobs, who is the founder of filmgeographies.com and the convener and coordinator of the Film Geography Specialty Group at the American Association of Geographers, or AAG, has done a lot of funded research among the Bedouins in southern Jordan. She is completing a book entitled Film as a Research Method, a Practice-Based Guide. And I will also be letting everyone know about that when it comes out, both as a book form, or online. So I'll give the floor now to Dr. Jessica Jacobs from Queen Mary, University of London.
Hi. Hello, thank you. Thank you very much, Joseph, for inviting me. It's really great to be here today, although I'm kind of not here, but I'm here, so it's nice to time travel. I would, I think there's going to be some slides coming up in a minute, so I will start my talk. And definitely, if you've got any questions at any point, as Joseph was saying, you can put them in the chat, or we can have, hopefully, I think there's going to be time for discussion afterwards. So I'll just get started. I've probably produced too many slides, but I'll do my best to get through them for you so we can discuss a bit more. So I thought I'd start with why use film, and then I'm going to go on to what makes a film geographical. Then I'm going to discuss a little bit about the work I've been doing, Bedouin Borders, the website, and the filmmaking project there, which is in Egypt. And so I've been working with Bedouin communities in Egypt and in Jordan. And then a little bit about the outline of the filmmaking workshops that I've been working with and collaborating with Joseph as well, in terms of the AAG and film geographies. So go to the next slide.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm confused.
So one of the things people, when they're thinking about using film, we're in academia, we're so much more used to an ethnography that involves observing, writing down, or quantitative data analysis. So it's all quite numerical or text-based. And even if we use video, it might just be more for documentation and observation. Whereas I'm much more interested in using film as a form of telling stories, working with narratives, but also reflecting at the same time on the processes of filmmaking and how that shapes and informs the knowledge that's produced. So of course, these are some of the quite obvious reasons or attractions of film, the digital nature of it right now, the networking, the cross-platform possibilities. And as we all know with internet, most internet is actually on video or image at the moment. One of the reasons for that obviously is a bit of cheating as well, because video uses a lot more data. So when they're calculating how much of the internet is video, and if you calculate it in megabytes or gigabytes, then obviously video wins. But in general, the sort of image and the moving image, even in the rise of TikTok in China, and tell me if I'm talking too quickly, that kind of movement is really clear. And that old adage that an image speaks 1,000 words or something can be really true. Once you actually start to analyze images and videos, you can unpack so much more, and you can put forward a message. That's one of the reasons why advertising is so image and video based, because you can pack so much messaging into these media, more than text. So I'm interested because it's an alternative form of knowledge production. As a female geographer, as someone who's a precarious academic as well, I'm very interested in sort of looking at other ways of knowledge production. Quite often journal articles and things like that can be very difficult, and there's lots of gatekeeping. So I was very interested in filmmaking and handicrafts as a kind of feminist approach to knowledge production, and as a way of connecting to communities. Another interesting thing is, historically speaking, film has now got over 100 years of material to look at. Recently, I've seen some fantastic footage that's been going around the internet, where they've colorized a lot of this black and white footage as well, which is sort of the cliche, is bringing that world to life for us a bit. So there's that sort of like immediacy of film and the growing body of material. Then technology. I mean, most of us have got, can we see that? One of these phones near us. So it's not even a phone. We can video everything. Because it's so image based, it can be naturally reflexive and self-conscious. I can talk about that a bit more. And I think it particularly suits participatory and intersectional methodologies. So methodologies that try and interrogate the relationship between the researcher and the researched, the community and the academy, and race and gender, because it kind of brings all that to the fore. It's got a ability to make a focus of these issues that can be quite often hidden in other methodologies, research methodologies that scholars use. Thanks.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry about this. Something shows up. Can you all see it?
No, it's not.
It's not showing up. Hold on a minute. There's been some technical glitch. There you go. Sorry, there it is.
No, it's the same one.
Still the same one.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's some of the things I was talking about. Is if you feel like there are obstacles and gatekeeping and all sorts of things going on with print, text-based methods, film and video can be appealing because it's really accessible for so many people, even without a smartphone. You know, even other phones have bits of videos, or cameras are reasonably easy to get hold of. So I think it really suits under-researched and hard to research topics. So that's a quick one, Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
Again, at this particular point, this is the first year, I think, or last year was the first year that students are all digital natives, and ourselves as teachers might be digital immigrants. So Prensky coined this term in 2001. So it's everybody, a digital native is someone who's grown up in a digital world. And a lot of your teachers are a little bit of a mix of both. So students today who are 18 and over are very comfortable with generally using digital recording and viewing devices. What's quite often lacking in the academy is that kind of media literacy and helping people understand some of the theory and problems and challenges of using that media, and also how to connect it. Thanks, Joseph. So just a little bit, we can go into this in the discussions as well about why you shouldn't use film, some of the problems, because nothing is perfect. So I've just listed a few things, and I would be really interested to find out what you think about some of the other reasons why film might be problematic. So I won't go through them now, I've just put them up on the list. So
we'll just go next.
Yeah. So when you're talking about film, what do we actually mean, or what do I mean? There's all sorts of ways. There's participatory, ethnography, observatory I've put down, which is millimolar documentation, videography, visual essays. There's all sorts of different ways to use film. I'm particularly interested in the relationship between fictional film and factual film. And so I'm really keen to argue that the distinction, because a lot of people assume that when you make a film as an academic, it has to be a documentary. There's this long line. A lot of the first films made by geographers and made by anthropologists were very much in the documentary realm, and the history of documentary and academic scholarship and film is very much intertwined. But I would sort of potentially argue that this is not that important. It's not an ontological distinction. Yeah, and we need to treat film as we treat any other text. It's a language. There's specific vocabularies. There's sub-languages. This is cinema, but all film, even recording. When the minute you press start, and then stop, and then you're choosing what to put and what to present. Even this recording today, Joseph, I guess, you know, because you mentioned you'd be editing it. So there's always a hand there deciding what goes on. So there's all sort of some kind of process beyond which just a sort of recording of reality or CCTV. And even with CCTV, there would be some kind of selection process about the quality of the film, whether it's black and white, the vantage point of the film, the ownership of that video, and what is done with it. So all of these things involve a kind of language that we need to understand if we're going to use film for research and for teaching. So using film for me, one of the observations I've made in terms of geography, and I think Joseph was asking this before, somebody was saying what makes a film geographical, and we've discussed this a lot in film geographies. And one of the things we felt was when we were discussing this, that we weren't quite sure what makes a film geographical when we set up film geographies, and we thought we'd see what films were out there, and then, you know, in true academic spirit, just see what makes a film geographical based on the films submitted by geographers. And I think these are some of the points, that they're place-based. Seems obvious, but it's really important. There's a big focus on the location of the films and what that location does. For me, in my films anyway, I think one of the main point is to bring the background, what's often the background in general filmmaking, to the fore. And it's not like literally bringing the background to the fore, but it's about involving the landscape and the environment in which we live as a character in the film. So they might not be speaking, they might not have speaking roles, but the landscape and the location of a film when you're a geographer is incredibly important. And then the other aspects are the movements of the subjects and objects within the frame. So that kind of temporal spatial relationship and use of metaphor. And then another point, which we'll talk about a bit, is the role of films as a mapping tool, how we can use films to map, which is a very geographical thing. Thanks, Joseph. So we can just go through some of these slides quite quickly, but I just wanted to show that the relationship of when you're using film for filmmaking, the relationship of you to the camera and of the camera to the subjects and of the camera to the background are really, really important. And lots of things are going on. Sorry, I've got sirens here. Lots of things are going on when that happens. So in cinema, these are some of the things that we know from watching films and videos and cinema and films all the time. These are some of the things that we're actually already literate in. If we've watched anything, any movies at all, we'll actually understand these things without realizing it. So there's a vertical movement, there's a lateral movement, there's movement left to right. There's even a movement on screen where when a character, because of the dominance of American cinema, when a character exits to the left, sort of west, they're going, when the character comes to the left, they're entering town, and the other way they're leaving town. I can't remember the thing, but it's basically based on American cinema and the Western.
I think they do like the stage left thing, Jessica. Like usually when somebody leaves left side, it's like leaving. Conventional cinema seems to suggest that.
Yeah, and a lot of that is to do with our Western movies and going into town and out of town, and a lot about how the West was won. So the movement of American colonizers and pioneers who are moving to the west of America. So some of that is just something we just understand without necessarily probably reflecting on it. These are other things that camera filmmakers use. As a geographer filmmaker, I don't often have this equipment, but the idea is that we can invoke these feelings, if you go to the next slide, by using different equipment. So we've got pan, tilt, crane, sovereign spectator, emphasizing psychological relationships, so sort of looking up, looking down, moving across space. So all of these things have a literacy of their own. The dolly, when you have a camera moving alongside a character, it's supposed to evoke a sense of empathy. It means that we are walking alongside with that person. We are with them. A zoom again, which is the tension and plunging in and out of scene. Handheld, which is the classic one for a lot of academic researchers or people out there. It's also got this sort of cinema verite aspect to it, which evokes its own sense of truth, and which is quite important, especially for academic filmmakers, because that's quite often what we end up using. We don't often have the equipment like cranes and dollies, although you can just use a platform with some wheels on if you want to do that. There are ways around it. And when those are the things during production, but there's also post-production, and a lot of the emphasis and the structure of the film comes through with the journey from the beginning to the end, the workflow of the film, and how it's edited. I can talk a little bit about that with a montage, adding background soundtrack. We've all seen so many films, I'm sure, on the internet with some weird musical soundtrack on it, and there's no particular thought about why that's being put there. There is a reason. It's not always very effectively used. So the sort of like lift music that you get in some movies. Maybe some of you are like me, just switch off the sound when we see things on Facebook and other social media because it just distracts. But it's very important when you're making a film for research and pedagogy that you really think through, why are you adding that soundtrack? What's it for? It's something that's quite often overlooked because of the dominance of the image in video. And then there's also effects and color correction, which in itself is write a whole book on color correction because it's so embedded in whiteness and our understanding of what's normal in film, and the whole history of Technicolor, the history of film, the way that the image of the white woman was used to sort of determine what was normal color and what wasn't. So montage is incredibly important. It's the way that we create our arguments. It's the way that when we're writing our journal articles, we create the dialogic and the dialectic sometimes, but for me, a dialogic conversation, reaching some kind of consensus and conclusion. The same thing happens with filmmaking, and we do that through the edit. So in the editing, you put two things together that are not necessarily together, and you create a third possibility. That's the classic idea of montage, and you create a new idea, and that's where the creativity can come out, And it's always also where the understanding can come out, especially when you're putting together two ideas or two arguments that haven't had an opportunity to have a conversation. And these might be from two different groups of people. It could be very powerful people, less powerful people who aren't talking to each other. You can go out and interview them individually, and then you can actually edit them into a conversation. And it's a really powerful and interesting way of creating or understanding some of the issues that are going on. And there's lots of different processes, match cuts and things like that, which are quite useful. So the filmmaking approach I've developed with my work is loosely called collaborative film. Obviously, as a white woman from the UK, I can't really wander around without acknowledging post-colonial relations and the subaltern and decolonize and all of those things. So it's very important to, from the outset, acknowledge the disparity between the researcher and the researched, and all the issues about, for myself, going to another country and studying and analyzing. So for me, film is really useful that way because it's a universal sense. It's something that people enjoy doing, and there's a lot of skills, transferable skills that can come out of participating in a group with filmmaking. Lots of people like to do it, and they get a lot out of it. Yeah, and we're working with stereotypes. A part of the process is going through those stereotypes. We all have those stereotypes in some way or other. We're exposed to them even if we reject them. So it's the process of filmmaking is where we can discuss that, because we're making images, and then we're always, as a group, reflecting on them and seeing what happens to them. And understanding the process by making a film, what's really exciting to me, by making a film, a lot of participants start to understand how those stereotypes are created visually, and then they start to unpack and understand how they can rework those stereotypes to their advantage. Yeah, so that's my idea of what collaborative film can do. Thanks, Joseph. So we could talk a little bit about the filmmaking I did in the Sinai. It was very much based on mapping. It was originally set out, I've got some text here, to produce a community-focused map telling the story of the origin of tribal borders in the Sinai. It came out as a set of documents. The original idea came from a set of documents that I came across, the original white explorer. I've discovered a set of undiscovered documents. But what was very interesting about these documents is they were really mundane in lots of ways. So the St. Catherine's Monastery, which is somewhere right in the middle of the mountain area to the south, has been a de facto part of the Ottoman Empire. It's sort of managing that whole region for a long time. It sits on the best water supply in the region. It has a document from Muhammad the Prophet giving it legitimacy to be able to be there. It's got some amazing texts. It's got one of the first Bibles. I think one of the codex is actually in the British Library, but it has lots of other amazing texts. But what it also had, when I was visiting and saw, was a bunch of agreements between the Bedouin community who live in the area and the monks, because the monks were acting as their employers. And through these documents, because it's often presented that Bedouin communities do not have any written history. It's always seen as an oral history that's handed down in sort of classic anthropological terms. There's no written record held by Bedouin communities, but the monks actually had a very rich and interesting history that they'd documented through these agreements that they'd written with the Bedouin tribes. And through these documents, it became clearer that the tribal borders that had developed between different tribes in the region of Sinai was very much based around these agreements, because different families and networks would agree to be responsible for different areas in relation to transportation of visitors to and from the monastery, and also goods, exporting and importing of goods. So the monastery sitting there in the center was the primary economic machine in its way by occupying that very important space, was then actually governing how the local community lived. So it wasn't a case of tribes just determining where to live based on crops or anything like that, because it's a very mountainous region, there's very limited access. So that was important for pastoral reasons, for the goat herding. So a lot of the distribution of the tribes was based on this agreement. But from this, I was very interested in using film, because I started off thinking, like a lot of people, a lot of visitors to the Sinai. This is from the 19th century. It was one of the expeditions, geographical expeditions to the Sinai to map it. And all the maps were based on a biblical understanding of the area, and also, of course, in terms of colonial occupation. So it was mapping it for military reasons, but also a little bit of biblical archaeology. So this was a map of the Sinai. If you go through some of the others, this is another map of the Sinai, geological one, which is all about the mineral and the potential resources and richness of actually taking economic advantage of the landscape. And if you see here, you can see some of the tribal boundaries that I was starting to look at. And I just thought, when you saw the two things together, it didn't really make much sense. And most of the board, when it came to a map of the tribal distribution of the Sinai, it was all about the borders. And I myself use that phrase, Bedouin borders. If you go forward. This is another map, so another economic element, a modern economic use of the landscape is tourism. And again, there is no idea or sense of a Bedouin community living in the Sinai at all. There is the monastery, which is it's the most visited place actually in the Sinai as a day trip, because it's quite handily 2 hours drive from most of the tourist centers, which are in the south. There's diving sites. Again, no representation of the local community at all. Next, yeah. So I had GRS coordinates of the tribal centers, which I put here in ArcGIS. It's a classic map. And instead of looking at the borders, I started to think about the centers. And friends living in the Sinai actually told me that these centers, which are actually the center of the spaces where each dot is a different tribe, it's a color-coded tribal map, shows a tribal border, but it just seems to me a lot more interesting to look at tribal centers rather than tribal borders. There seems to be a lot more interest in from a local perspective as well. And the idea of bordering tribal borders was from a very military, colonial, post-colonial perspective. It was all about knowledge and control. Whereas looking at tribal centers was a much more interesting point to me. But I didn't just want to do it like this. I thought, let's make some films. So next map, next picture. Yeah, and also handicrafts, which is not about, we're not talking about it today, but this is a hand-sewn map. We're using those tribal borders to try and create a map, because handicrafts are such an important part of Bedouin culture, used in tourism and used to tell stories and used to represent landscape as well. And yeah, the next slide. So I wanted to include that too. So that's to come. So this is what I've completed so far. The handicraft area is going to come later. I was going to mention a little bit about gender there, because of one of the issues that we could talk about with filmmaking, especially in societies that might be quite segregated, is it does tend to get a bit dominated by men in terms of public space, because it's happening in public space. So that was one of the other reasons I wanted to include the domestic and interior, so it was more accessible to all communities. So these are the films that have been made. There are 8 of them. And, you know, it seems really basic and obvious, but putting them on a map seems really important. They come from 3 areas. St. Catherine's, which is very much the focus of the economic powerhouse of the region, and Nuweiba, which is one of the contested areas because there's a tribe up here who's not part of the alliance. There's an alliance who work with the monastery, the 12 tribes, and then there's a tribe to the north that hasn't worked with the monastery because one of them killed a monk in the 18th century and they've not really got over that yet, the 19th century. So it's a contested space. And then the Wadi Arada, which is in the center, which is much more of a sort of what lots of people might consider to be a classic landscape of Bedouin community with goat herding and deserts and things like that. So those are the 3 locations, and these are the 8 films. They all use a different kind of filmic genre or technique in order to tell a story. Some of them are just very, very short with no dialogue whatsoever. This one at the bottom, St. Catherine, is a fictionalized, it's like a trailer for a movie. Catherine, St. Catherine has come back from the dead and she's returned to search through a document. She's looking for some rights to land. It's a sort of scripted idea, but it's just a trailer at present. It's got an actor from Cairo in the lead role, or one of the lead roles, and the Bedouin community are playing different parts. And then there are other films that were made in collaboration with the community that tell stories, vaguely folkloric stories. Tea by the Sea is also a scene from this movie, and this is the telling the story to camera kind of thing as a sort of talking head. So lots of different kinds of filmmaking put on a map. So I just wanted to speak a little bit about media literacy. I think it's really important. I can't emphasize how important I think it is that students learn as much as possible about filmmaking, because they're such consumers of filmmaking. It's really important in all disciplines that they are given a chance to understand how these things are constructed. It also enhances their experience as students. They're already familiar with this technology, and you're already familiar with this technology as students, but teaching it in an academic context can really help give really important transferable skills, but sort of increase media literacy. And a lot of students I talk to, they say, oh yeah, we use Instagram, Facebook and all these things, but it's not academic. But it's really important to make that connection between what people use in their daily lives and how we use it in academic research and teaching. This was something from a film studies professor at Queen Mary, because I was trying to connect with that department, and he was actually explaining that they do, when they teach film, other students aren't allowed to access it. So they have a great resource, the film studies department have cameras, equipment and everything, but it's only limited to film studies students because of pressure on resources and also the thing. But it's, he really felt that this was something that if there was a way of connecting with other parts of the department, that would be really important. There's a whole interesting history of film studies and how it evolved actually as an academic discipline in and of itself, which I could go into another time. But it was just this sort of idea that there is a real disconnect sometimes between film studies as a subject and how it applies to other subjects, which is a issue. So this is a general outline of one of the courses I've been running. I did one for students about race inequality last year at Queen Mary and Roehampton. And also I've recently done one in Cairo for students living in a heritage area. So this is some of the things that we go through. We do a Q&A, we discuss equipment, we talk about montage, there are group exercises, we talk about ethics, copyright, things like that. Then we go out and start making films and we review films. We talk about our favorite films and what exactly it is about those films that works, like what are the mechanisms that actually create those emotional responses. And then we start going into montage, and then we always have a screening and discussion, and people are invited to watch the films afterwards. It's really important to have it as a community event. It's really good fun as well. We go through telling the story. These are some of the things that are really important to understand when making a film. Storyboards is quite an interesting one. I didn't always use storyboards, but when I'm teaching now, I do try and get people to storyboard. I think it depends on what your research is about. Of course, ethics, consent, legal issues, and then who your audience is, how you evaluate the impact of the film, and also how you can use it for teaching. That's just a screen, a slot from editing and how the image is created, the final editing image from the workshop. This is just a screenshot of some of the work of the students in Cairo. You can see that they're making storyboards and they're also taking pictures of the locations when they're going to make the film. One of the issues with this project is called Love Letters to Khalifa because it's a place-based filmmaking workshop where people who live in a heritage community are talking about the value of that place to their community, but also using fiction to do that. So they're kind of like little short movies, little stories, not even little, but they are short stories. But one of the issues we found with that, obviously with COVID, so all of this was done on Zoom and WhatsApp and Google Drive, and it was working really well, but we do eventually will have to go there to finish it off because it's some aspects of filmmaking are quite hard to do online. Yeah, and these are just some pictures of some of the examples of how you can create conversations in filmmaking. So these are all interviews in situ, the location of the film. This is a project in Syria and Damascus. The location of the filmmaking was really important. It was a shop in the old city, different shops. So that was quite crucial. So it's an example of how the background is part of the filmmaking process. It's really important to think through what your background is. I've thought through here what my background is. It's a storyboard in textiles. And then you can create the conversation by editing these people to talk together. So everybody was kind of asked the same question, and then in the edit, you kind of create the conversation. And in the next slide, it's a similar thing. These are different stakeholders in Syria. People in the old city, coming to the old city, people working in the old city, people running the old city, the sort of power brokers. And quite often that's an example of how people who don't actually meet and talk to each other, but with filmmaking, you can put them together in a conversation. So it's really great fun.
Yeah, I think this is
thanks,
pretty
Joseph.
much, yeah.
Yeah.
At this point, I think we may be ready for questions or comments, or just looking at the chat at the moment. And one of your colleagues, Fiona, was here earlier, and she just wanted to see the version when it goes on YouTube, Fiona McCarthy. So are there any questions at this point or comments about talk by Jessica? I was wondering if maybe you could tell them about how the film geographies came together and what how we managed to curate those films that are in there that also shows our own view of what geography means to us, considering that we receive so many films yearly for screening at the AAG. Do you want to maybe make some comments?
Great. Do you think you could put it up on the screen share, the actual website?
Yeah, I'll do that now. Just maybe to give them a sense of the website we've developed. But maybe to give some context, we also may need to, okay, here we go. So here's the front page. of the website.
I was just wondering whether we've got time to quickly screen one of them.
We tried doing that in my classes before, but it seems
Oh,
to
it
not
doesn't
work with the sound. I always wanted them to see Coney Island of the Mind because it's such a conversation starter and it's about stereotypes. I always wanted them to start there and then talk a little bit more about other things. But yeah, I can't make it to work. So those of you who are interested to see more of the films curated through the years, since we started in 2016, right? And when we had our very first AAG shorts held in Boston, every year we have to do that. We went to New Orleans, and of course this year didn't really work out because of the COVID. But if you want to see the films that we're showing here, these were submitted to us by geographers. And it's curated because it's also, we can't accommodate everything. And we have to use our own very subjective way of choosing only which one would make it. Also, there's a production value that had to be considered. So something like, there are a lot of wonderful guerrilla filmmakers who created those films, but some are probably a little bit difficult, to mount. And maybe that's one of the things we could even comment about in terms of what eventually made it. But if I could show a little bit some of the films that we have here too. Well, we got, I'm sorry, let me just see about.
So we've made it just free to register. I mean, it's obviously all free anyway, but you just need to register in advance to actually watch the films. And we're actually going to be updating the website very soon.
So these are some of the films there too. Yeah.
They do. Most of these come out of calls that we put out every year, and we have a call we're about to launch again every year for, although we still have all the films from 2020 as well. Some of them are up there already that were selected. So I think we started in 2017, is that right?
2016, or 2016?
Yeah, 2016. Oh God, it's been a long time.
I know.
As a way of finding out what other filmmakers were doing and creating a community of geographers who are interested in film. And we had some really, really amazing films. They're very varied. Not every film is perfect, and we do have a sense of criteria that we go through when we review the films. There's a review panel, and they do have to sort of, get 3 out of 4, let's say. So production values is important, but it's not the only thing. So if a film has got some real significance and the production values aren't the best, it still can make it into the viewing platform. So it's not really designed like a lot of other film festivals are, in that there's no laurel leaf at the moment. We don't actually award best film. It's not particularly competitive. It's supposed to be a way of just discussing films, and work in progress is also really important. So we really want to move on that. I think there's a new call at the moment, which is working with handicrafts, but it's about, we want to also develop discussions for people who are just starting out making films, where they can get feedback from peers about what they think works and what doesn't work. So it really is supposed to be designed as a sort of collaborative space where people can get support. You don't have to be a professionally trained filmmaker to submit a film at all. And people are making films in all sorts of subjects. There's really great range of different areas where people are filming. There are films about obviously landscapes is a big issue, a big subject, migration, social justice, racial justice, lots of things about justice. I guess I'd say that's definitely one of the attractions of using film. It's a sort of form of activism. It's a form of trying to make and effect change, because it's about trying to reach audiences beyond the academy in some way. So that's one of the appeals of filmmaking.
Right.
And yeah, some of them, I think my favorite ones that Joseph was talking about are, not that we've awarded any awards, but some of the best films are the shortest ones. So it's really amazing what you can do in 2.2 minutes, and how you can get a really, really succinct and clear point across. But we also have the sort of more classic 20-minute plus documentary style films as well.
I do
So
have
really
to
anything.
yeah. I'm sorry. I do have to mention that before I call on Dave, because he has got two wonderful questions in the group chat, that one of the films that we considered came from the Philippines, remember? And he's, goodness, the name just escapes me at the moment, but his last name is Red. He comes from a rather, I guess you can call it something like a film royalty in the Philippines because of award-winning siblings and relatives who create films. But he did a Ryutuba documentary. The production values are top-notch. Storytelling, wonderful. If you get a chance to look at it online in filmgeographies.com, it's there. It's one of the contributions from the Philippines. It has nothing to do with my being a Filipino that chose it. It was just really, it got more than 3 out of 5 thumbs up from people. So that's right, Ryutuba. Dave, can I call on you just to ask these questions? You got 2 questions, so maybe we can respond to it. Thanks, Dave.
Sure. So, thank you. Thank you for an excellent presentation. I found that really fascinating. It seems to me that all the criticisms that can be directed against the use of film in research and pedagogy can also be directed at writing and the use of still images. For example, when there are either through accidental or deliberate editing, something that somebody writes or says on film or shows in an image could be misleading. So the question really is, do you think that film is more or less susceptible to these sorts of issues?
I think each media, for those same reasons, it's like this. I was just talking about that with inequalities, actually, that unless you actually devise something to protect against structural inequalities that exist in the wider society, everything that you do will also have those same issues. And that's quite similar to this, in that unless you kind of protect against those things and acknowledge those things, it's very hard to stop those things from happening. So I think you're right. I definitely think you're right that there are the same risks and challenges, and I don't think it's more or less susceptible. I just think that the media determines how those challenges play out. So I think it's a sort of wider issue that we have in general to do with the way that we produce knowledge, and also the stakes. I mean, when you think about what knowledge production can do and its relationship to power, and how you can exact and enact power through any media, it's going to happen in film as much as anything else. And the motives why people would do that and how they would do that are the same in any media. What is possible, I think it's possible in all media too, is looking at it from the beginning. So exploring this question from the beginning and making it one of the subjects of discussion, and how you said misleading, how the edit creates a story. And I really think it's important to focus on that. It's this, as I was saying, one of the ways as example of how you can create a narrative, but you should be able to look at a film and say, did the filmmaker do that? How did he do it, and why did he do it? It's like positions and interests, like what would be the purpose of misrepresenting people. And also filmmaking has a lot of ethical considerations that are important that might not be quite so important, because talking about somebody in an article, somebody you've done research with, might be less contentious than actually showing their image on film and causing them to be representing them as saying something that they didn't feel they said. So in an article, in a journal article, in Progress or Transact, something like that, they'll probably never read it. They probably won't even know if they've been misrepresented. It might not even be in their language, but with filmmaking, it might be much more obvious because they're more likely to see it. They're more likely to know about it. So in some ways, there's more pressure on filmmakers to make sure that they do go to their participants and ensure that they have their informed consent, and that the final edit is something that they feel they haven't been misrepresented.
Dave, I wonder whether you could ask your other question too before I call on Manfred to ask his question. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that was an interesting answer to the first one. So the other question is really, you know, you talked interestingly about those film and stage conventions, you know, entering at the left or the right or whatever, and the use of music and things like that. Is there any research through experiment on the effectiveness of those sorts of conventions?
Maybe I could answer. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, Joseph, go on.
I can answer, Dave, I could answer you based on my own research that came out as a publication 11 years ago in 2009 in Geo Journal. I wrote about Filipinos in the early years of cinema, and the Filipinos were actually portrayed by African Americans. They were soldiers in New Jersey at the time, portraying Filipinos. Pretty much the story directed by Thomas Edison was Manifest Destiny, really showing the early capabilities of America in terms of becoming a superpower or an imperialist. So, I mean, they came late in the game, so to speak, and then they wanted to make sure that the early years of cinema capture those things. One of my inspirations in writing that was this, you know, I'm sure you also know Gilles Deleuze, who wrote about spatial hierarchy, how the absence of an image, for example, could, in a film frame. In a film frame also make absent some of the make de-emphasize their contribution. So I was looking into that and how they are so very skillful in not showing the people that they're colonizing. So in the case of those early films in the Philippines, what was interesting, at least for me to look at, was when the soldiers portrayed by African Americans came into the screen. Portrayed by non-African Americans came to the screen. They had to drive away the Filipinos who were fighting back. This is a minute film, and it's available to be seen at the Library of Congress website of the United States. It's public domain. But what I thought was interesting was that they really had to literally drive away the Filipinos in the screen. It's a really an obvious flag waving moment there. And then in other studies that show those kinds of things, even and Dave, I hope you don't mind my answering a little bit different from the soundtrack, but more on subtitling is also riddled with so many political economies. For example, a film like Kandahar, for example, is a film about a woman who wanted to go back to Afghanistan, and she's based elsewhere. And then when she goes back there, she had the story was really to stop her sister from committing suicide, right? That was the whole premise. But what was interesting was that when she comes to the Iran and Afghanistan border, every time a native speaks, they're not accorded subtitles. So it's a interesting kind of textual or semiotics of the film language trying to silence others, and of course, with the soundtrack too, in terms of both being used diegetically or extra diegetically, how it could influence some decisions. But that was my experience with it, using text-based film images. Maybe
I think those are really great points. And I think as well that about research is one of the reasons why I think I've been more drawn to the fictional end of cinema, because there's a lot more acceptance there that cinema is a manipulative tool. It's there for persuasive rhetoric. It's there to deliver a message. There's a much bigger body of critical work about that. But when you actually look at if you treat video as just a neutral tool that is just there to explain and expiate and add something to another way of delivering a message on a PowerPoint or in a lecture, then it's problematic, because that's where the sort of illusion of neutrality comes into play.
Illusion of neutrality, yeah.
Do you want to
Thank you.
ask additional? Okay. Manfred, do you want to go and ask this question here instead? I can read it, but I would rather that you maybe add a few more information about your question. Mon, are you online? Oh, okay. So I'll just read it for Manfred. His internet connection is quite spotty. Quick question for Jessica. I do agree, and I'm fascinated with the potential of film as a method in geography. I wonder how a filmmaker geographer could capture experiences of violence, brutality, and suffering without fixating an exploitative gaze on subjects. Based on your experience, is it a matter of participative action, or could it be done at the level of techniques or storytelling strategies?
Thanks. Yeah, this is a really important question. The gaze, the male gaze, the object of the gaze, cinema and cameras really hone in on that, even if it's the gaze on yourself, the selfie. I can answer that. I've done some work on sex tourism in Egypt, and I did a lot of interviews for my PhD of women who were in relationships with local men in Egypt. And I was using film then. I tried back in early 2000s, I asked if I could submit my PhD as a film and was told yes in theory, but the answer that came back later was no. But anyway, I used a lot of film with that, and I had this same issue. It's like I didn't want to film these relationships and apart from this, a side of informed consent and ethics and people not really wishing to talk on the camera, I was really concerned not to actually create something that would be an exploitative gaze. And there was lots of interest at the time from the media about it. They were kind of like, they would have loved to seen a film about it. But one of the ways around it that I came up with, and I think there are lots of different ways, but the solution I found was to separate the audio from the image. So you can have audio testament or you can have text testament. So if it was about violence and brutality, you can have that typed on the screen. If you've got interviews or you've got facts about it, you can have an audio interview with somebody, but what you actually see on the screen is something else. And that's that can happen. I was talking a little bit about that with the montage effect, but when you explore the relationship between sound and image as well, you can have them doing two different things at the same time. So it creates a third idea. So if you have the violence and brutality being spoken about or being typed on screen, you can choose what image you put to go with it. And that image that you go to, that goes with that violence and brutality that you're discussing, I would definitely recommend shouldn't be an image of violence and brutality. There's no need. There's enough of that. We've got enough of that in cathartic cinema anyway. So you can sort of experiment with the different formats there and choose different images that create an idea about what you're trying to say about that violence and brutality. Does that answer the question? I was talking about at a level of technique. There are storytelling strategies as well, which tie into that. And I would also say, in terms of participative action, it's a great thing to collaborate with if people are telling stories about violence that they've experienced or anything, then it's a great way to talk through with that person how they want that to be represented.
I do have to add a little bit of that, Jessica, because when I was a reviewer for the Pearson geography textbook about maybe 8 years ago, when I was still teaching in the US, I was asked, we were called fact checkers, right? So there were many of us pretty much doing this type thing, reading the whole book, really looking at inaccuracies, what have you. But being a visual geographer, one of the things that I did make a comment that I did have a back and forth with one of the editors was that there was this, you remember when there was this bombing in London, and it was the picture that they used was this person with a marauding person, like that kind of thing, and then the act, it's a great action shot. But I said, I think that might be problematic to use because you're stereotyping a certain look for the T word, right? At the time, we couldn't even use the word terrorism. So they said for the T word, and they said, well, what do you suggest? You know, and I said something like, well, what about, say, the aftermath of something, like maybe a burning bus or the one that was really in the news or something else. And then eventually they ended up not using anything, but I just said it might be, we might be aiding in making these images problematic by using them the same way that, you know, we've had so many stories before of poverty porn. You know, every time like a cover of development geography comes in, it's a story, it's a picture of an impoverished child or a person, you know. So there is a point for people like ourselves wherein we just say like, oh, enough of this already, you know, because there are so many stories that are waiting to be told that do not just capture this. And it unfairly also characterize a place as just being a landscape of despair, when in fact it could be more vibrant, more convivial, could also be poor, could also have those kinds of despair, but not just the stories that are in there. And I thought this might be a good intervention for people like ourselves who are in the visual culture, who are studying there both in practice and in scholarly analysis, to really make sure that that's in place. Yeah, so
Yeah,
anyway.
it's really important. And I think a lot of, we were looking for a film in my local community to screen that's relating to Black Lives Matter and something for a community festival. It's really important. And it was just really hard to find a film that didn't depict Black Britain as violent. You know, even if it was with storylines of violence in some way. And it just seemed like unnecessary, like there's other stories to tell. So we didn't, in the end, we're still looking for a film to screen.
So you sent us a link to a film that
Oh
you
yeah,
did.
that was just an example of what I did with the women who I was interviewing in relation to their romantic relations. What I did, my solution was to film where they came from. So rather than the audio is actually me, and because it's just a test run, it's me and talking to a friend of mine in a Bedouin man. So I was just testing it out rather than using the interviews. But the idea would be that there would be women speaking about their relationships, and what you see is not them, and you don't see the landscape they're in. You don't see the landscape of Egypt. What you see is the landscape where they came from. So you start to understand why they're doing what they're doing. Like, it's a story of a little bit you can understand visually as you're listening to them. You can visually understand what is the contrast and why they're traveling all that way to have those relationships, because you're looking at it's actually filmed in, I just did some filming in Dundee and put that in, because that could be like a typical British landscape where these women are coming from. So that way they're not there. The sexualized imagery of the men and the women together is not there. The focus is shifted from the actual relationship to the places where these women come from, which is quite often hidden from those relationships, because everyone's focusing on those relationships taking place in the landscape of Egypt. So I was just trying to use the landscape of the UK as a way of understanding.
I do have to say though that film, which I already saw, I have not encountered anything like it, you know, within readings or anything. So to me, it's a good illustration. I was reminded of another feature film with Charlotte Rampling, if I recall. It's called, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting at the moment, like Going South or Heading South.
Yeah,
I think was
South.
it Heading South?
Yeah.
Yeah, where she had, I think, more like romantic sexual relations with a person of color, and she does that as a kind of tourism, right? So it's a wonderful way of also bringing out some issues. For me, like I've never even encountered that at all, you know, even in my reading. So film can sometimes be a good way to illustrate some of those, we call this our own liminal spaces before, right? Like the things we don't even talk about in public conversations, or it's not even part of the national conversation, much less regional. So anyway, so are there any other type of questions or maybe comments that may also be peripheral or directly related to the talk? Okay. Well, maybe some of the things we could talk about would be the questions that were asked to me by my students before, which I think one of them is something to do with what makes a film geographical, right? And I think I forget the other two at the moment. I think it's more about film geographies also. How do you curate? And anyway, so
I think there was something about oh, just research. No, it was about something. Yeah, go on.
I think it's more about the your research, because among the Bedouins in the Sinai Peninsula, because it's also something that many of us probably haven't been to, or at least know more about. So this maybe just some kind of stories or narratives that you may want to share with us about working with this nomads, or yeah.
Well, not quite nomads.
That's quite yeah.
Yeah, I think it. What was I going to say? That the filmmaking was a really great way of creating an activity around research that I really liked. It gave a sense of purpose. It gave a focus on location. We were discussing all the time the places to film and why to film. So that was really an enjoyable part of research, I guess. It's a big discussion. We had to discuss quite a lot about with the community I was working with, what sort of stories. Again, there were all sorts of issues, and there were lots of stories that couldn't be told. So they really wanted something, the community that I was working with, they wanted positive stories. They didn't want any problematic stories, but they wanted some of their issues to be told within those stories. So land and fighting over land became one of the key aspects of the project, and a lot of these ideas that people were talking about was this contested landscape. And even though that wasn't about Bedouin borders, what came up through this was a lot about losing power over their land. So because of the encroachment of tourism and things like that. So it is really, and that project was a mapping project, because it was about trying to, you know, re-territorize it in some way by putting them back on the map and using film to do that, and bringing those stories and issues that may or may not be known, because the Bedouin is so much of an idea, especially in Western discourse. It's very much with the whole wandering nomad, Baudrillard, and all sort of senses, all the road movies you've ever seen, and they always run out of Los Angeles and go into the desert, the Nevada desert, all the things of evocations of what desert landscapes mean. So this empty landscape, projecting of the Western self onto the empty landscape, which is very much part of tourism there. And this sort of burden of embodiment that the local community have to bear in representing and performing those narratives for people. So that was a very key part of it. So it was quite important to navigate those kinds of lines in using the filmmaking.
Are there any other questions or comments? You can just put it. Maybe just two things, Jessica. And if there are no more questions, we can, you know, maybe. Oh, there's one right here. I'll ask this question first. I'll just do my questions last. But one of our students, Rick, thanks for this question. It is very interesting that we can use film to show the landscape of where narratives and experiences happen, especially this time that abstraction become more absurd in a way that emotions, gestures, and time loses its value when doing our research, yeah, especially with this really online remote thing. My question is, in our time that we experience a very extreme situation, how can film as method in geography help researchers to live in a virtual world to do the research? Have you done any of that, like sort of remote filming, that sort of thing, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. The project in Cairo, yeah, thanks for a great question. a project in Cairo who had limitations in that we probably do need to go there at some point, but everybody was doing their own filming. So we basically ran Zoom sessions, and we could do this. Joseph and I are talking about doing this, developing this as a workshop. We would be holding, if people are interested, let us know, and we can ask about this in a minute. Holding 4 to 5 Zoom sessions, 1 hour, where we go through some exercises and basic training. Everybody's got a phone at home. There's an app called Filmic Pro that we were using. It's quite cheap to buy, so it's a way of standardizing the footage. And through those exercises, you go out and you can film in your community. So we might not be able to come to you to do it, and you might not be able to come. There might not be a physical space where we do a filmmaking workshop, but we can do a lot of it online. So we could run a workshop and teach filmmaking, and then you would go out and do the exercises and then upload the footage. We discuss the footage and we do the editing. Editing obviously is already online, and that can be done either separately or as part of a project. If you're working yourself and doing your own research, you can go and ask your participants to go and film things and bring them back to you. So you don't actually have to go there. I think it's really an excellent tool for fieldwork in the current climate. And it's an excellent tool for empowering local communities, because now they're more useful and important than ever, especially for academics in the West who've been so used to flying around the world and doing research. Now they need people, if they want to carry on doing those projects, the importance of the local researcher has really grown. So it's very, and it's, even if whatever research you're doing, you can ask people to go and make short videos, collect footage. As we did in Cairo, people were filming their local environment. Then we would come back and we would go over things like lighting, all the technical aspects, sound, framing the image, and all those things in the workshop. Does that answer the question? I think it's a great way to carry out research virtually.
Yeah, if I may add to that though, thanks a lot, Rick. That's a wonderful question. I think there are a lot of students in this Zoom session right now who actually underwent what we call fieldwork last mid-year, where they basically had to use, I know Ivy, for example, I know some people who are here at the moment who I could see have done this, where what they do is they may not have the feel of the place, they may not interview the people, all these kinds of sensory things, and the smell, the sound, all kinds of other things may not be present, but they use like Google Earth in order to do their field work. And in one of my research recently also that did geo-narratives, kind of mapping, with stories in 2 communities in Bulacan, it's an outskirt of Metro Manila, Jessica, and the one in UP campus, in our campus. When we did those types of geo-narratives, I thought at first I couldn't transition to a more online thing. And then it just happened, wherein we gave them instructions to create their maps, collage, pastiche, drawing, all kinds of things that they're comfortable with, and tell us more about it. And it just like resulted in a wonderful, wonderful creation that's not really so much on the map as much as the stories that came out. Because we are visual storytellers, and to a certain extent, that's I think what you also mentioned. And let me just take this opportunity to say that although we've been working together for many years at the AAG, mostly on film, but this talk actually kind of made me want to develop a course on visual geography that's more on practice-based, and practice-based, it's more like making a kind of photo voice, except that it's more filming, then you discuss it collectively with the class, and it becomes an output that tells a story in a more filmic way. So, and maybe this is just a follow, this is actually the question I wanted to ask you. What can we expect from the book that you are writing that's practice-based? Is there something that we can expect from it? Or what does it entail, or anything like that? Is it going to be how-to or something?
Well, the book covers a lot of the history of film and the history of film in disciplines and the relationship of analog to digital. As so much of our language about film, even though it's digital now, is based on analog technologies. So it's quite useful to understand the relationship. And also some people are still interested in using analog filmmaking. It has a load of exercises in it, practice-based exercises, and it goes through some of the, again, it's practical constraints, legal, ethical constraints, copyright, some tips on how to get around that, tips on what kind of equipment to use. That's constantly evolving, so that's the most difficult part of the book, really, because it's changed dramatically in terms of what you can use, especially with COVID now as well, and working with groups. It's just a lot easier to use smartphones, and there's not really any reason not to use smartphones anymore. It used to be a quality issue, but that's largely disappeared. So it's about how to relate to your phone as a camera, because that's something that sometimes it's hard, even just switching it around, like the basic thing of turning from portrait to landscape is one of the key aspects of having a smart device that's got so many different things. How to make sure your notifications are turned off, storage, all of those practical considerations. And then talking about impact, engagement, the montage, basically what we've covered in the talk today, production values, workflow, montage, the power of the edit, and then dissemination. And obviously now with COVID, there'll be a lot more about how to do it virtually and how to navigate the online environment and using film and all the new places where you can put these films, because there's just so many different platforms where you can present films now. So it's quite a good time to use film.
There is a question here from one. Actually, her name is Mylene, and she actually went to our workshop in New Orleans. Remember the place of Zeitgeist? So Mylene is one. Yeah, she went there. But anyway, she's got this. She's on Zoom right now, but she can't speak because she's using her mobile phone. But she asked this question. Thank you for such an interesting presentation, Jessica. As someone who has been part of some TV film productions here, I guess my curiosity lies with the geographies of the production process itself. I'm wondering if it is something that you have also looked into. Based from my experience, the imposition and the starkness of class hierarchies in these microgeographies are still very much evident within some production, where stars ate with the directors, bit players are just left to their own devices all around the shoot and location. I'm curious if it is something that you have explored too. If you have, I mean, you don't do narrative feature, although you did mention something about the blurring of the fiction and the documentary.
Yeah, so I've produced a trailer. I've had some involvement with the film world. I like to have a discussion with the film world because they have their own idea about what constitutes a film. So it's always interesting to engage with them. The submission process can be very fraught. People are pitching. It's a very hyper competitive world. What they do fund, what they don't fund. I think this is a really important point you're bringing up here. The way that different participants in the filmmaking world are treated. It's a very neoliberal environment, if I can say that. Like there is a few people that are incredibly overpaid, and then everybody else is scrabbling around for the bit. There's a job in filmmaking called the line producer, and I thought the line is really interesting. The fact that he's called a line, or he or she, I think it's often he, the line producer, and the line is things like what you pay the stars and what people see in terms of film production, like all the costs related, the high-end costs related to employing famous actors and things like that. And his job and the production of all of that, that's what we're all familiar with production. And a line producer literally deals with everything underneath that line. So it's all the murky stuff where people are not being, the sort of things that we don't see, and more mundane, let's say, the more mundane aspects of paying for films, but also where so much of the inequality occurs. So I haven't actually sort of dealt with it directly myself. What I have looked at and I have written about is the process of filmmaking as a performance. And I think I'd always try and write about the actual experience of filmmaking as just as important, if not more important, than the actual final film. So I think it's really important to reflect on that and talk about this process when you're doing the film, to investigate questions like this. Where do the inequalities lie? What is the relationship between all the people who are making films? I think it's really important what you've brought up.
I like what you said about that, Jessica. You know, Harriet Hawkins has written about that too. When she was, you remember, there was an article she did where she was made as a resident artist in a university, and she said she doesn't even know how to draw at all. But one of the conditions was for her to collaborate with an artist. But in the end, that whole article was just so inspiring. I usually send it to all of my students in whatever class, because it's like worlding, really, like your own encounter of the world, where she said something like, even just the talking about how to produce something that we're going to exhibit together is itself a kind of worlding, right? So and I like the part where you said about, you know, talking with the people in itself is very productive, enriching, that even if we do have to create a final product, the creation process itself is already been very rewarding, right? And it's the one that really informs our work. So yeah, we have some colleagues here who actually mentioned that they have their own films too, that they create from their grassroots partners. I suppose, I don't know, Mon, if this is Orion, this is from the Save Our Schools, but I was telling them that if we make available the YouTube of your talk, we can also put it there in the comment section so that people could see what they've done. And I wonder whether that's the one that was written there. But we have another question here from Bob, taking from the question that was asked, posted originally by Manfred, about the exploitative gaze. How should we present issues through film that would easily be understood by an audience, especially students in basic education? Bob taught also in K-12 or a college capacity, right? Like, is it still all right to use the sad polar on an iceberg to talk about climate change? You know, the talking heads. That is right. Yeah, good question. I don't know. It's hard to do that, right? No, to just come up with. I know what the question of Bob is though. Like, if you're going to show it to K-12 students, you have to assume their own subjectivity in a way, you know, in order to view it from a more culture specific kind of lenses. But it's still really going to be tough because not all is the same, right? And you know, making a film, sometimes, Bob, it's sometimes more about emotional resonance, you know, to someone. It could be a throwaway quote or an image that was shown in the film that really touches someone to inspire them to do something, you know, maybe for social change, maybe to do something else. But yeah, but just if you want to say something too, that's fine. Then we have another question. Polar bear. All right.
Polar bear question. I know, it just reminded me of some of the early geographical films and why they were so exciting to see, because they brought something to people that they wouldn't be able to necessarily see. So one of the first films, I think, was about the Arctic, and filming there, and then it would be shown to an audience in the UK, and everyone was like, wow, look at that. It's, you know, it would have been the first time that people would have seen icebergs. And there was this big idea of film as a spectacle, which we haven't spoken about that much. So it had a great wow factor. And now the trouble with the image of the sad polar bear of an iceberg is that it's quite often seen as something so far away, it's not have meaning to our lives, and so it doesn't have that sense of impact anymore. And also is that sense of powerlessness, I think, about what can we do about it. So yeah, I think it's those images need to be examined. I think that's all. I think we need to think about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Mm-hmm. And what else can we show people in order to understand climate change.
Right.
Maybe
Yeah.
I mean, a lot more images of our own bins in our own homes, maybe.
we were discussing that some of these are my students in graduate classes in violent geographies and cultural geographies, and they're here right now in counter cartographies actually. So some of their questions emanate also from some of our discussions. Here's one from Bianca, and she said, thank you for the talk, very, very interesting. I wanted to ask what kind of challenge you might or do already face in producing films, both as a scholar and creative output. In your work, do you think there is necessarily a divide between the two fields that you must pick aside? I guess more of a scholar creative output, or did they come together?
I think, yeah, I think I tend to follow the product. So I'm very interested in the process, and I'm interested in the output, and in terms of how it can engage the community that make the films, but also the audiences. I think a lot of it, you know, it's like anything. Once you make it, it creates a life of its own. So we don't have that kind of like, oh my God, I need to control everything about it and where it goes, and it's all about me. It's not. So I think I'm quite relatively want to share a lot of these things. So where it goes and what happens to it is definitely important, but it's not something I stress about too much. I just do think that right now we have to write about film. In order to get film more acceptable, there probably has to be more writing, and it's something me and Joseph are struggling with, because I've been so interested in making films and doing things, and I'm very practice-based, but we probably do need to hark back to this analog technology of writing and nod to it, and that is the way the Academy works for now. So we do need to write more about it and reflect, and also it's a chance to reflect more as you write and process things. So I don't think about picking a side, but I do like the fact that films take on a life of their own, and lots of filmmakers say that, like how people interpret it, where it goes, what happens to it. It's got a lot, that's a lot more democratic as well in a way. So it's quite nice to see it go on. People might go and use it for their own purposes. I might use a film to like this to sort of talk about it in a presentation, but the people that made the films will be using it in a different way, and that's their right. I mean, it's shared ownership, so it's a good thing that those films can go and often do that.
And we have one more question, and maybe we can wrap up after this, because we do need to also talk about possible future things we can do, like a workshop or something. From Ryan, who's one of those who's creating films from their grassroots partners. In connection to participatory approaches like photo voice and others, I would like to know, to what extent should the researcher intervene in the process of community documentation, aside from the production schedule? How much direction should we give? How much do we edit? I mean, based on your experience, Jessica, can you maybe give us some insights?
I think for each project has its own kind of dynamic. It kind of depends how it's funded, who the partners are, what the purpose of the film is going to be for. So I think this is, for me, it's changed in lots of different ways. I can think through some of the projects what I've working on. In the end, the editing has been carried out by me and somebody else. But I've also, the editor, I work with an editor, and one of the films, I should have said with the 8 films, one of the films is his film. So I had, you know, he was with me throughout the whole project, and he was filming and working on the project, but he wanted to do his own film as well. So he's made a film. In terms of editing, with the Love Letters to Khalifa, the Cairo project, there's been a lot more interest in editing in that project. So if there's more interest in editing, if we have the capacity, we include the editing and part of the training, but not always, because not everybody wants to be part of the edit. And the edit is very much more to do with the work of the reason for the project in the first place. So it might be something that people are less interested because it takes a lot more time to learn. It's not impossible, but not all projects have the time scale to actually incorporate editing. But even if they don't learn the editing skills, we hopefully have spent enough time with those people that we know what kind of edit they want, and then we show the edit to them and make sure that obviously that they're happy with the edit. And it's about listening as much as possible to the community to sort of try and represent the voice and they want to be representing, and always showing edits back to people to make sure they're happy. It's a discussion, and make sure that people are informed about it. But the technical aspect of learning editing, it's got a lot easier. I'm a lot more better at it than I was years ago, because it was Final Cut used to be much more complicated than it is. So it is a lot easier to do, and it's becoming more and more accessible for people to participate more fully in editing. But for me, it's a question of time.
When you get a chance, could you type that app that you mentioned earlier, like Film Link or something? Or
this is the
Pro?
app we use. Filmic
Do you want to just
Pro.
type it right there, or
it's
Filmic
an
Pro?
Android,
Okay.
Android and
iPhone.
iOS. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's just a very nice way. It has a really nice way of being able to upload. The tip would be not to upload it to photos if you're using it in Apple. But we use that for Love Letters to Khalifa project, because it was to make sure that everybody's creating the same standard of footage. So we're working with 5 teams, 5 teams of filmmakers, and we know that when they upload their films, they're all, even if they're using different phones, the footage that they produce will be the same format, the same resolution, the same audio, etc.
If we do get to do some kind of online workshop in the future, like say next year, Jessica, this is probably a stupid question to ask, but don't your students in London or QMUL have internet issues? Or is it assumed that everybody gets the same kind of steady, stable internet access? Because it's a big issue here.
Yeah, we use, I don't know if you use Blackboard Collaborate.
We don't. We have our own version of it here in our university. We call it Ublet. Out
of all the formats I've been working on, is Teams, Zoom, and Blackboard. Blackboard Collaborate actually shows the bandwidth of the students when they log in. That's what I thought was quite interesting about it. It shows their data connection, and it is really interesting that some people have quite bad connection. But that's the only format I know that tells you that information. So it's not always easy to know. Some people are coming in and saying they don't have microphones, their microphones don't work. I think it's a growing issue, and even living in a shared space, you might not be able to hear it. I mean, like at the moment, I'm sharing this room with my daughter, who's also on Zoom all the time as well. So, you know, it's not easy. I really do think it's something that we need to discuss more. But at the same time, I think a lot of people are quite keen on the live performance, the live lecture, because it's more interesting as well to be involved in something that's live than to click on a recorded video later. Not that it's not useful.
Right, like this one, which will be seen by others.
Yeah, I don't want to say, it's really good. If you're watching this on a recording, it's absolutely fine.
Yeah, true.
But it's really important for people to come to things because they ask such great questions, and you can't ask questions when you see something on a recording.
Right, yeah, that's true. The reason why I asked that, or I raised that issue earlier, is because my students are many of them are here at the moment on Zoom, but we had big issues about internet access and connectivity, and I feel bad for them. And one of the things that we did, you know, we had this this is going to be recorded, so I'd rather not say it. But it's related to something that we're supposed to do, and we give it to our students, and that would be the whole thing they're going to study for the entire semester, and them getting overwhelmed by it. And I thought, which was kind of a very, very violent act for a teacher to do to a student. But anyway, that's another issue with the internet access.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that.
You do that too, right? Are you doing blended in QMUL right now, or or do you do mostly remote?
Oh, no, not doing any face-to-face at the moment.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm sorry if this is just going to be a little bit, but one of my colleagues who's also doing music geography got COVID because he's teaching in Pittsburgh, and they do a blended thing. And then he just sent me an email one of this last time and said, I had COVID, so I'm going to stay here. And I hate doing remote teaching. And said, well, don't we all? But, you know, COVID is serious business. Anyway, are there any other questions? 7:41, maybe just entertain one more question, or if there are thing. It's 7:41 or 12:41 for you in the UK. Okay. If there are no more questions, before you go, we do have, where was that? Oh, I can't find it now. We have a certificate to give you, and I'm supposed to show it, and I can't find it. It must have been buried in some of this many.
Speech prepared.
I know. Oh, there it is. There it is. I can show it now. So we would like to thank you, Dr. Jessica Jacobs, for this wonderful talk, the Geography webinar, and also co-sponsored by your university in QMUL. This is the one that we wanted to give you as a kind of certificate of appreciation, signed by me and our chair. That's all, really. So maybe we can engage them, because we do have a mailing list also, in terms of, you know, in the future, if we do get to do a workshop that would involve you and interested students here, we could probably talk more about that. And the other one is probably, if I do get to do that special topics course on visual geography, maybe I can even rely on you to collaborate with me on how to make that work, whether it's going to be face-to-face or not. So thank you from people. Thank you so much. I hope to see you in the AAG. Our call for film is open. We will review your film and give feedback. Yeah, that's one of the things we do for filmgeographies.com, is that we give honest to goodness feedback about your film to make it better, and so that we could also stream it. So two things as a final parting shot for this. The one is, if you want to look at filmgeographies.com, you just have to open an account. We don't share your information, but that allows you to see all the films that we have right there. For my own students, I will have to assign them specifically a specific film from that to do a reflective paper on. And then the other one is, thanks, Joyce. The other one is, oh, what was the other one? We just did the film geographies thing. I forgot about it. Maybe it's the book. Oh, I did ask about the book. When it comes, we will also announce it, just in case. It's a practice-based kind of text, maybe in making sure that some of us will use film as an approach and method for geographic research, you know, and pedagogy or something. Anyway, thank you very much, Jessica, on behalf of our department. Thank you. It's 12:44 for you, 7:44 for us. And we will put your talk on YouTube, so it can be seen by other people who are not here at the moment. So thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.